At just 26 years old, a young nurse stepped off a train in Sydney, and within minutes, she disappeared. What happened next became one of the most brutal crimes Australia has ever seen, a case that shook the nation and transformed its justice system. Anita Lorraine Lynch was born on November 2, 1959 in Sydney, New South Wales, to Gary Bernard Lynch, a graphic artist with the Royal Australian Air Force, and Grace Peggy Lynch, a nurse. She grew up in Blacktown in a home defined by warmth, stability, and strong family bonds that shaped her early sense of identity. Those who knew her described her as beautiful inside and out, noting her gentle nature and the calm, empathetic temperament that would later guide her in her nursing career. From a young age, Anita displayed a natural kindness that made her presence comforting to the people around her. As she entered her teenage years, she became involved in local beauty pageants, participating in multiple competitions, and gaining recognition for her poise and confidence. Her dedication and charm ultimately led her to win the Miss Western Suburbs title in November 1979, a moment that highlighted her potential for a successful modeling career. Despite these opportunities, Anita felt more drawn toward a path centered on helping others. Influenced by her mother's profession and her own growing interest in caregiving, she chose nursing as her vocation. This decision reflected both her character and her desire to make a meaningful difference in the lives of those she encountered. Her early years reveal a young woman shaped by love, support, and a deep sense of compassion, setting the foundation for who she would become before the events that later changed everything. After completing her schooling, Anita chose to follow her mother's path and entered the nursing program at Sydney Hospital, where she quickly became known for her calm, patient, and reassuring nature. Her colleagues often remarked that she had a natural ability to comfort people, and her presence created an atmosphere of trust that made patients feel safe. During her training, Anita met fellow student John Cobby, a moment that would become significant in shaping the next years of her life. John was immediately attracted to her, but believed she was far beyond his reach, thinking she would never notice him. That assumption changed when Anita approached him during a shift, beginning a conversation that led to an easy and genuine connection. Their bond deepened quickly, and within months they were spending most of their time together and eventually moved in with one another. Their relationship progressed steadily as they became engaged, excited about their future, and later expecting a child. The miscarriage that followed affected both of them deeply, but they remained committed to each other and continued building their life together. They married on March 27, 1982, in the presence of close friends and family. Rather than taking a honeymoon, they chose to invest their savings into creating a stable home, renting a house, adopting 2 dogs, and buying a small boat. Later, they moved to Coffs Harbour, where John worked with horses and earned more than $10,000 after betting on one he trained, allowing the couple to travel the world and experience new places together. As Anita and John settled into married life, the excitement of their travels and shared experiences initially strengthened their bond, giving them moments that felt promising and hopeful. After winning more than $10,000 from a successful bet on one of the horses he trained, John used the money to take Anita on a trip around the world, allowing them to explore places they had dreamed about. Traveling, however, had a different effect on each of them. While John felt satisfied with what they had seen and believed it was time to establish a stable routine and begin building a family, Anita's perspective shifted during their journey. She began viewing life with fresh questions and uncertainties, and the idea of settling down no longer aligned perfectly with what she felt internally. These emotional differences, though subtle at first, gradually created distance between them. By early 1986, they recognized that their goals were moving in separate directions and decided to take time apart. The separation was not hostile or abrupt. Instead, it reflected mutual understanding. Anita returned to her parents' home in Blacktown and continued her nursing career with dedication, while John remained deeply emotionally connected, believing the separation was temporary rather than permanent. Their relationship remained caring and respectful, and by January 1986 they began spending time together again, discussing possibilities of reconciliation and even looking at potential houses. Anita continued her normal routine, working her shifts at Sydney Hospital, commuting from Blacktown, and maintaining close ties with her family. These final weeks represented a period of reflection and calm before the events that changed everything. On February 2, 1986, Anita completed her shift at Sydney Hospital at 3 p.m. and later met friends for dinner in Redfern, spending the evening in a routine and familiar way. After dinner, she made her way to Central Station and boarded her usual train toward Blacktown, preparing to head home. Normally, she would call her father from a station to pick her up, but the public phone was broken that night, and no taxis were available at the rank, leaving her with no choice but to walk home. Around 10 p.m., Anita began making her way along Newton Road, unaware that she was being watched by a gang of 5 men riding in a stolen white HT Holden Kingswood. 2 witnesses saw her walking alone moments before the car abruptly stopped beside her. 2 of the men leapt out, grabbed her without hesitation, and forced her into the vehicle as she screamed for help. A teenage boy, his sister, and their mother heard the cries from their home and ran outside, but the car sped away before the boy could reach it. Inside the vehicle, Anita pleaded to be released, telling the men she was married and menstruating, hoping they would show mercy. They responded with violence, repeatedly striking her and breaking her nose and cheekbones before forcing her into acts of sexual assault. They stole money from her purse and used it to buy fuel while she was pinned down in the back seat. The group drove to a secluded paddock in Prospect, dragged her along a barbed wire fence, and continued their assault. Believing she could identify them, ringleader John Travers cut her throat, almost decapitating her, before the men burned her clothes and fled. When Anita did not return home on the night of February 2nd, her parents initially assumed she may have stayed with a friend, as nothing seemed immediately unusual. They had no reason to imagine anything was wrong and expected to see her the next morning. However, when Anita failed to appear for her scheduled nursing shift the following day, concern quickly turned into fear. She was reliable, punctual, and dedicated to her work, and her unexplained absence alarmed both her family and colleagues. Realizing something was seriously wrong, her parents reported her missing on February 3rd. The next morning, on February 4th, a farmer in Prospect noticed his cattle gathering around something unusual in his paddock. Curious, he walked toward the area and discovered Anita's body lying in the field. Her injuries were immediately apparent, and the brutality of the scene made it clear that she had suffered a prolonged and violent attack. Police were called to the location and quickly established that the body likely belonged to the woman reported missing only a day earlier. Anita's wedding ring remained on her finger, allowing authorities to confirm her identity with her devastated family. Investigators began reconstructing her final movements, tracing her path from the train station and gathering accounts from witnesses who had heard her screams. These early steps formed the initial foundation of the investigation as officers worked to understand what had happened and identify who might be responsible. The discovery marked the beginning of a case that would grow in scale, urgency, and national attention. In the early phase of the investigation, police focused on the possibility that someone close to Anita might have been involved, a standard approach in homicide cases. This led investigators to her estranged husband, John Cobby, who was already overwhelmed with shock and guilt after learning she had been abducted and killed. Police questioned him intensely, treating him as their primary suspect. According to John, the interrogation was harsh and unrelenting, involving continuous accusations and significant emotional pressure. He described being physically intimidated and mentally worn down as officers insisted he was responsible, despite his repeated denials. As the questioning continued, John began to doubt himself under the weight of grief, fear, and exhaustion. Eventually, in a moment of extreme emotional confusion, he gave a false admission that he had been involved in Anita's death. However, once investigators began examining the timeline, physical evidence, and John's movements on the night of the crime, inconsistencies became clear. His account did not match the forensic details or witness statements, and police determined that he could not have committed the crime. John was officially cleared, but the ordeal left him deeply traumatized. Public suspicion, media attention, and the emotional collapse that followed led him towards substance use, as he struggled to cope with the magnitude of his loss and the intensity of the investigation. Although he was proven innocent, the early focus on him created lasting consequences, illustrating the complexity and pressure of the case's initial stages. The autopsy conducted on Anita revealed the full extent of the violence she endured. Examiners documented severe bruising across her body, multiple fractures to her facial bones, and deep lacerations caused by being dragged along a barbed wire fence. They noted that 3 of her fingers were nearly severed when she grabbed the knife in an attempt to defend herself. The most devastating injury was the fatal wound to her throat, which had been cut so deeply that she was almost decapitated. The medical examiner stated that she may have been conscious when the final injury was inflicted, a detail that underscored the brutality of the attack. Shortly after the autopsy was completed, explicit details were obtained by radio host John Laws, who read them live on air. His broadcast shocked listeners across the country, igniting public outrage and sparking immediate demands for justice. People reacted with anger, disbelief, and grief, and the case quickly became one of the most discussed crimes in New South Wales. In response to the growing pressure, the government announced a reward of 50,000 Australian dollars for information leading to arrests. At Anita's funeral, her husband John broke down, overwhelmed by the loss and the circumstances surrounding her death. The public, deeply affected by the horrific nature of the crime, began calling for severe punishment, including renewed discussions about the death penalty. The intensity of public emotion, driven by the autopsy revelations, pushed the investigation forward and increased scrutiny on law enforcement as they searched for Anita's killers. The trial for the murder of Anita Cobby began in Sydney on March 16, 1987, drawing intense public attention due to the brutality of the crime and the widespread anger that had followed the release of autopsy details. Before formal proceedings started, John Travers changed his plea to guilty, a decision that immediately positioned him as the central figure in the case. Media outlets reported heavily on the defendants, including the backgrounds of the Murphy brothers and Michael Murdoch, which later resulted in a jury being discharged because of potentially prejudicial coverage. During the hearings, the prosecution presented a structured case built on forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the secretly recorded confessions gathered with the help of Miss X. The autopsy findings confirmed the extent of Anita's injuries, including systematic beatings and near decapitation. The defense attempted to question the reliability of the confessions. Public reaction was immediate and intense. Many believed even life sentences were insufficient given the cruelty of the crime, and calls for the reinstatement of the death penalty grew louder. The verdicts brought a measure of relief, but the case continued to stand as one of the most disturbing crimes in Australian history. The trial began on March 16, 1987, marking the formal courtroom examination of the events surrounding the abduction, assault, and murder of Anita Cobby. Before proceedings officially commenced, John Travers entered a guilty plea, confirming his involvement and establishing his position as the principal offender. Media outlets closely followed the case and published details about Michael Murphy's background, including information that could prejudice the legal process. As a result, the jury initially selected for the trial was discharged, and a new jury was appointed to ensure that the proceedings remained fair and impartial. During the trial, the prosecution presented a comprehensive body of forensic evidence. This included documentation of the systematic beating inflicted on Anita, the sexual assaults committed by all 5 men, and the defensive wounds she sustained while attempting to protect herself. Evidence also highlighted the injuries caused by the barbed wire and the near severing of her throat, which ultimately resulted in her death. Testimony clarified the sequence of events, identifying Travers as the individual who carried out the fatal act. In response, the defense attempted to argue that the confessions had been coerced and sought to challenge the extent of each man's involvement. However, the overall evidence firmly supported the prosecution's case. On June 10, 1987, all 5 men were found guilty of abduction, rape, and murder. 6 days later, on June 16th, they were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Justice Alan Maxwell described the crime as a calculated and cold-blooded act, calling it one of the most horrifying physical and sexual assaults ever examined in court. In the aftermath of the trial, the impact of Anita Cobby's murder extended far beyond the courtroom. Her parents, Gary and Grace Lynch, became central figures in advocating for the rights of victims' families. They joined forces with the parents of another murder victim, Ebony Simpson, and together they established the Homicide Victims Support Group. This organization provided structured emotional support to families affected by violent crime and worked toward improving the legal and social response to such cases. Their efforts contributed to calls for tougher sentencing laws and reinforced public pressure for truth in sentencing reforms. The consequences for the convicted men unfolded within the correctional system. Michael Murphy died in 2019 at Long Bay Hospital, while the remaining 4 offenders continued to serve life sentences in various maximum security facilities across New South Wales. Some faced violent attacks from fellow inmates, reflecting the deep resentment their crimes generated within the prison population. For Anita's family, the emotional toll was profound. Her parents struggled with the loss for the rest of their lives, and her sister later reflected that they never fully recovered. John Cobby eventually rebuilt parts of his life, overcoming substance abuse, remarrying, and raising 2 children, though the trauma remained deeply embedded. He later reverted to the surname Cobby with the support of his children. Anita's memory continued to be honored publicly. A plaque was placed in Sydney Hospital, and the case remained one of Australia's most widely recognized tragedies. The severity of the crime ensured continued public opposition to any proposals that could allow the surviving offenders to seek future release.